Good morning, everyone. My name is Siobhan Horan and I work for Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and I'd like to welcome you this morning to our latest webinar in the Unlocking Knowledge Transfer series. So this webinar series has been designed to showcase the expertise in the Irish research system and how companies can tap into that for the benefit of their business. So this morning's session is focusing on research collaboration, very important topic to us. And we're very pleased this morning to be joined by two entrepreneurs who are very skilled in working with the research space. So they're going to give their insights into how they chose their research partners and how they managed every part of the engagement from first finding a research partner to carrying out research projects. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel this morning. So that is Brandon Hogan, Senior VP of Engineering and Operations at Aerogen Limited, and Donna Buckley, Senior Director of Research at Dell EMC. And our discussion this morning is going to be chaired by Alison Campbell, Director of Knowledge Transfer Ireland. So before I pass over to the panel, I'm just going to go through some short items of housekeeping just before we start. So our structure of our webinar this morning is going to be a panel discussion followed by a Q&A. So we would invite you to ask any questions that you might have, and we will answer these at the end of the webinar. So you'll find a panel on the top right-hand side of your screen, and you'll have a question box on that that you can use to submit any questions and comments that you might have. There is a raised hand feature, but we don't have access to that, so please do not use that and use your question box instead, and that'd be very much appreciated. And also, very importantly as well, the last thing to say is that we are recording this webinar. So we don't have any PowerPoint presentations, but we will be circulating a copy of the webinar following the event. So if you have any problems with your computer, your connection, or anything like that, do not worry, you can listen back to this afterwards. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Alison for our panel discussion this morning.
Thank you, Siobhan, and welcome to everybody, and welcome to our guests. It's a delight to be here, and I'm really chuffed to have Brendan and Donna with us. And one of the reasons for that is, having had conversations with them earlier in the year, we kind of hit upon the fact that it would just be great to have them present and have a wider conversation with you, the audience, because they've got so much experience and some really good and really sharp views on research collaboration, working between companies and the research base. And I've certainly very much welcomed some of the insights that they've been able to bring to me and for us. So as Siobhan says, the way we're going to operate this is I'm just going to have a conversation with them, and then we'll hand back to Siobhan, and it's a Q&A from you, the audience. So my first question, and it's something that I think is always incredibly interesting to know the answer to, and I think changes over time, maybe only slightly, but it does have its nuances. And I think that the question to both of you actually is, why do you work with universities and institutes? What causes you to do it, and what's the value to you and to them of doing so? Brendan, maybe you'd like to kick off.
Yes, so maybe if I take that question as a starting point. Yeah, so we began working with a third level institution about 12 years ago. It was with the University of Limerick. And the reason was because we had some difficult, complex problems to solve in-house, and we didn't have the expertise. And we believed with their expertise at the college, it would be a big advantage to us.
So expertise for you, Donna, it's for you, is it the same story? Are you looking for something else?
Yeah, it certainly begins with expertise. You know, even in working in a global organization, there's certain specialisms that you know you mightn't have in-house that you want to tap into, particularly future and emerging technologies, right, where there may not be an awful lot of skills within the industry or within our organization, but yet there might have been a lot of work done in the various research institutes, and that's what you want to tap into. But in addition to that as well, it's all about kind of building relationships and getting to know a broader knowledge community within a certain specialized focused area, whatever that might be.
So that's an interesting point. how do you find the researchers that you want to work with? And I guess for both of you, that's not just Irish based. So how do you find the people you want, and how do you build those relationships?
Yes, so for us, we would have many contacts in both the industry and also academia as well. We would have research programs with probably about 8 to 10 different colleges, both in Ireland, Europe, and America as well. And like you would build up an understanding of who's who, what they're doing, what they're at, looking at publications, looking at looking at areas of interest, and you would find them through that. But I suppose, when we began with the University of Limerick, we did know quite a few people there. And I suppose, we did establish quite a lot of success, which gave us a lot of confidence to reach out to other experts in other locations.
Very interesting. And for you, I'm going to come back to something there. For you, Donna.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Sometimes it comes through the research publications, but more often than not, it's usually referrals from people that they may be in industry already. Sometimes they might be in academia or other parts of maybe government agencies and things like that. When we kind of make it known that we're interested in undertaking research work in particular areas, a lot of people kind of refer you on to who they work with, and that helps a lot, because for us a big part of it is establishing a good longer term relationship as well, right? So it's not just about the expertise in itself, but it's about establishing a good working partnership. So the referrals process is very, very important.
The referral bit, I think, ties in very much to what you were saying as well, Brendan, slightly differently, in terms of particularly the UL relationship, where actually, it was like the first time and there's a repeat business. And all of this, very much strikes me as you were using the words, it's about relationships. It's about repeat business, whether it's you or somebody else. There's a degree of recommendation there. So I guess what you're looking for is not just the skills and the expertise, but you're perhaps looking for something else in terms of delivery.
Yes,
Am I right?
Yeah, so there's a huge aspect of a referral there. So for us, we built up a strong rapport with them. We're now in our 4th program with that college, and I suppose each one has built on the previous one. They had their staff working in-house with us. We had some staff based in Limerick as well. There were postgraduate outcomes, and some of those staff are working now here in Errigan. So I think it's a win-win for both the college and also for ourselves as well.
So when you're going into one of these arrangements for the first time, it may be that you've had a referral, but it's perhaps your first contact working with that research group, working with that institution. How do you feel your way in, and how do you set things up so that you're not going to have too many surprises on either side along the way?
Well, I think the main thing is to negotiate a contract up front. And that contract, it depends what's important to ourselves and what's important to the college. I suppose from our perspective, IP, intellectual property, was very important that we would own that in our space. And back then there were little or no agreements in place. For example, with KTI, now they've all come since. So KTI have done a fantastic job, but our first one took around 8 to 9 months. And it was like a long time, and it took. We wanted to have access to the IP. The college wanted to protect the taxpayers' investment, and the question was, how do we find the best that would meet the needs of both the college and ourselves? But I think once we got the first one negotiated, the rest of them worked out quite well then from a contractual negotiation perspective.
Okay, Donna, what's your experience in terms of the IP angle? Is it important to you as a company?
It kind of, for us, it kind of varies from project to project, right? So some initiatives we'll be very open about. They might they might be kind of adjacent to our activities in our products, so complementary to what we do, but not core. So in those cases, you know, we'll collaborate, might get involved in research papers, may even do open source initiatives along with the research institute. But then for the other areas where, you know, it's quite important for us and becomes maybe a commercial endeavor, then in that case, yeah, we're kind of anxious to make sure that we have the right construct around the IP and how that's used. And you know, that can take various forms. We've lots of experience now in terms of, took us a while to figure out what's the best way to structure our contracts, I will admit, but we've been at it nearly 10 years now. So we have various different approaches in terms of how we lay out our contracts, how we negotiate and things like that. So it can vary from, you know, exclusivity to all the IP to, you know, right of first refusal, because we might not be sure whether it's the research endeavor itself is something that we actually want. You know, sometimes you don't know at the outset. So you know, there's various approaches that we have, and I think just in general, I think you know, the negotiation process got a lot better over the years. I think even the HEIs have got more familiar with the different approaches as well, and it's definitely got easier.
Well, that's very good to hear. So I've heard it's got easier and that the KTI template agreements are helpful. I'm assuming that altogether it means that negotiation is a more productive experience and perhaps faster. But one of the things, I guess, at the heart of it, and you alluded to that, Brendan, is actually having the conversation, much as you were saying there, Donna, about, you know, different IP, different situations. Do you find it easy to have those sort of realistic discussions at the outset, both in terms of what you want from it, what the IP might mean, and things around timelines? Are you finding there's changes as different parties come to the table in terms of that ability to be frank and open at the outset?
Yeah, no, I think it does. Yeah, and I think it's best to have those conversations up front. When you have those afterwards, it tends to be a bit too late. So having those conversations up front is really important in terms of what does the researcher want, what does the college want, what does the HEI want, and what does the company want as well. And also I think to get alignment on expectations, because, you know, the company might want to get a solution quite fast. Whereas the college, you know, would obviously be looking for, you know, a 12, 18, 2-year program. So it's important to understand, does your needs fit what the college is looking for? And, you know, there may be an opportunity to dip a toe in the water, to do some scoping work, and then maybe understand what might be this for both parties. And that can help with the negotiation as well. So it could be using, for example, a voucher, you know, to get some early work done that would help you scope out what's required, and then frame this to see what depth and breadth might be in it, what expertise is required, what fields of expertise, how much is required, and how long it might take.
I like that approach, and you articulate it very well there. One of the things that I always find fascinating as well, and you get different answers depending who you talk to, is we've talked so far about why you might do a piece of research with a college, perhaps some of the conversations that you might have to thrash out what you each want from it. But how do you place a value on doing a collaboration with a particular research group? And by that I don't mean how do you put a financial value on it, but how do you put a value on it within your organization, and how can you and do you persuade internally that it's right to invest in this kind of a collaboration? And of course, investment's not just money, it's also about the time that's involved. Is that easy? Is it hard? Is it about having devolved budgets and autonomy?
Yeah, so maybe if I take that question first. So when we went with the University of Limerick back in 2008, we were a small company then, you know, quite small indeed. And so
how do you justify?
Yeah, so from a justification perspective, we did have a problem that we needed to solve, and the question is, how do we solve it? Can we do it ourselves in-house, or have we got the expertise? And of course, you know, there's a certain chance of success. Might you achieve it in-house? You could, like you may not. But you know, what we clearly saw is that it would need a lot more expertise. The expertise was not in-house, and we got some early feasibility work done first, which clearly gave a lot of encouragement, a lot of encouragement in-house, and let's say with the powers to be in terms of what could be achieved. And you know, seeing some photographs come back, you know, from some expensive instrumentation, that certainly helped us to better understand what could be achieved by going to the specialist expertise outside. And to me, that early work was a big advantage.
So for you there, Brendan, that there's a lot around making the case, which obviously you believe because you wouldn't be doing it in the first place, but making that case around this provides something for us that we don't have in-house, and this is a good place to do it.
Yeah, that's correct.
And what about you, Donna? Do you have challenges justifying why you should place the research in Ireland?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, it's a global landscape, right? So you're kind of, you know, there's always compare and contrast as why Ireland, why an Irish Research Institute versus maybe one of the leading ones in the US or somewhere else. So, you know, for us, it always kind of comes down to, you know, how well we can operate with with the research team, the quality of the work that they can do, and you know, establishing, you know, a confidence in the engagement that we have, and you know, again, it kind of comes back to the type of project as well, right? In some cases, it might be early landscaping of a particular area, so it could be about educating ourselves, and learning from the research institute, potentially maybe leading towards hiring some PhD graduates and things like that, to, you know, if it becomes something more core to us in terms of a potential solution or offering, then, you know, it becomes more difficult to justify because the level of investment is usually higher, and that's where you kind of get into this kind of comparing, you know, one institute versus another institute and so on and so forth. So in those cases, then, you know, the track record of the researchers, their track record and working with us in other areas in the past and things like that, all of that kind of comes into play.
So a lot of this is, in my mind, potentially coming back to, it's about relationships, it's about good working relationships, it's about a track record in some way, and being able to demonstrate that, whether it be through a substantial and an enduring relationship, or whether it be through, as Brendan was saying, dip your toe into the water, try something with an innovation voucher, and if that goes well, and you can demonstrate a good relationship forming, good delivery, then that also can provide confidence to you and to the company at large for engaging some more. Now, thinking of some of the trends that seem to be coming across the horizon, one of them that I think we've all noted internationally is in terms of not just licensing, but also in terms of research collaboration. There's a little bit more of an appetite within companies to perhaps engage with a startup or a spin out from a college, rather than necessarily with the higher education institution itself. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, so from the origin perspective, we are clearly seeing that, and we have engaged with a number of spin-outs, and in fact, there's one of those which has come now to a conclusion in our favour. So we very much see more and more of that, and will do into the future.
And why? Why are you going for working with the spin-out rather than necessarily working with the research group back in the college?
Well, I suppose we do work with representatives of both parties. So, but I suppose, you know, when you have, I suppose, a record of success with working with the college, you also then build up confidence on what's been spun out and looking to see then how it might fit in your industry. and you know, where the fit makes sense, it does make sense, you know, to work quite close with them and even to acquire them.
Ah, very interesting. So there's a sort of potential longer stream there in terms of the acquisition. Does it also, is there an element there? It's something you talked about earlier on, Brendan, about timelines. Is it a different kind of engagement that you might get with a spin out than you might have with the college?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a different cultural time clock between industry and between academia. You know, industry, you know, it tends to be quite fast. Academia can be quite slow when you compare it to the standards expected by industry. You know, academia might say industry is too fast to create the research. So obviously there's got to be a meeting of minds there. And I think it's important that both sides have clear expectations in terms of what is required and how long it will take. And also a very strong understanding of knowing when something is complete, that it actually is complete to the understanding of the parties on both sides.
Thank you. Are you seeing this trend as well for engaging with spin-outs, Donna?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have a corporate ventures arms that looks at investments in spin-outs and things like that as well. So, I mean, it's, you know, as Brendan was pointing out, you know, it's one thing to develop a technology, it's another thing to find its commercial fit, right? And I think that's where the attraction of the spin-out is centered on, because, you know, effectively, you know, going through that whole exercise of figuring out the market, the dynamics in the market, where that technology could fit in with the market, and what it's, you know, getting to a point where you can properly evaluate its potential. That's very important, and you know, it's a key element of actually bringing anything to commercialization. Trying to do that through the existing structures within an RPO that is not really there, right? You know, I mean, it was very good at developing the technology, refining the technology, but not necessarily take you through all the different steps of figuring out how you could actually bring it to a commercial offering, right? Because to do that, you have to understand all the nuances of the market in which you're trying to enter, and the types of customers and the types of proposition that you can actually make around a solution at the end, you know. So it is it's a rapidly developing trend, and I think it's very good. And I think, you know, seeing the more and more spin outs occur out of the universities is very encouraging, because that makes it much easier for us as an organization maybe to engage in research activities on the one end when it's early stage, but also then to engage in, you know, pre-commercial activity through the spin outs when it's at a later stage. So, and the more points of engagement that we can have across the life cycle is always better for us, particularly in Ireland.
It's interesting, and I guess, you know, in terms of trends, one of the other things that we're seeing, and European funding and DTIF funding are cases in point, are the kinds of relationships and the collaborations that can be struck and actually can be supported, that involve more than one company or a couple of companies and a college getting together. And it seems to me that that's definitely a very organic way of evolving the way in which research collaborations are beginning to happen, with very different parties coming together, offering some very different things into the mix. Plus the ability to access funding.
Yeah, so we're seeing more of that as well, where we have a partnership maybe with a supplier, ourselves, and a customer, and bring all three parties together. So there's more and more of it happening, all right.
Yeah, it's definitely been a common experience for us, and we've been heavily engaged in Horizon 2020 projects for a long time now as well. And you know, that bringing together the different expertise, some of it is, you know, on the technical side of it, but some of it might be on the research or the kind of market side of it as well. So, you know, give you a good case in point. We've done a lot of work in privacy and data privacy in general. But within that, it's not just about the technology. It's also about, you know, the legal side of things, right? So what can you do? What can't you do? What's legally permissible? What isn't? And you know, particularly in an area like data privacy, where you know, things are still evolving, right? So you need to have the current and the best expertise and knowledge around the legal frameworks as much as you do around the technology itself.
Thank you. I've got one final question or topic to discuss with both of you, and it still sits around trends, but obviously it's a little bit about future gazing, because we are where we are, and we're all online. We're in a slightly different place than we were at the beginning of the year. And one of the questions I have for you is around, you know, what the future of research collaboration could look like, and is there a future for it? One of the things that I found quite surprising, actually, and encouraging, is when talking with colleagues internationally, they're reporting that their engagement with companies is actually very buoyant. I think everybody's been surprised. They thought it might sort of fall off the edge. They've said that they've seen in certain sectors, automotive, that kind of thing, that there has been a drying up of some kinds of research activity with companies. But in others, and not just life sciences, so not just COVID responses, they are actually still seeing interaction happening, and they're seeing companies who are still out there looking for a bit of a competitive advantage. But the question we're all asking ourselves is, that's terrific. Is that going to continue going forward? Where do you see collaborating with colleges going in the next 6 to 12 months? Will it still be vibrant?
Yeah, so I think, Alison, from our perspective, I think it's a very interesting question. I think our industry and, you know, the medtech life sciences, it continues to grow and develop. And I think as long as that, you know, maintains that, we will be very engaging with various colleges and institutes. And I think we would see it, you know, we would see it continuing. And I would say our engagement in the past, you know, has brought a lot of expertise to our company and helped the company, you know, increase and grow up to this stage. And I feel will continue into the future.
Very good to hear. Donna, what's it look like for you, or what would you anticipate it might look like?
Yeah, I mean, within our sector in ICT, it's constantly moving, right? So, you know, your competitive advantage always lies in the future, right? So you always have to be looking to see where you can develop your new sets of solutions and technologies. And if you look at the recent trends in AI and data and things like that, and how a lot of businesses are now transforming themselves, we're really only at the start of that process. There is so much to be done. So, you know, I mean, COVID is obviously going to dampen down some activities, but I don't see it holding back too much for too long. There's so much opportunity out there. I think an awful lot of companies will be investing, and they'll have to invest, to be honest, to keep up, because there's just so much opportunity ahead.
That is a very encouraging place to end our part of the conversation. One of the other things that struck me when I was chatting to people internationally was a point that quite a few people made, which was during the recent months, the kinds of arrangements that people have put in place between the research system and industry look absolutely amazing and fantastic. And what we mustn't lose sight of course, is that that's been built on the back of long-term investment in research and in researchers. And it's about getting that balance right and making sure that we can maximize interactions, but also making sure that there's a good strong base there that we can actually leverage from. Look, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. There's lots more I could ask of you, but I think it's probably appropriate that we turn that over to today's audience. So I'm going to hand back to Siobhan, who will manage the Q&A session. Siobhan.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you to our speakers for that really great discussion. And questions are flying in, so I'm going to try and get through as many of them as possible in our remaining time. But also, if you still have questions, please do feel free to continue posting them. So the questions that have come in are for both speakers. They are quite general topics. So the first one I'm going to ask is about internal company buy-in. And have you had any difficulty in securing that buy-in within your organizations when it comes to working with the research base?
I think maybe if I take that one first, and I think if you can show early success, you know, and early success can come from just, as I said earlier, dipping a toe in the water, spending a small amount, you know, of cash, and building up that success and confidence. And I think with that, it does come quite fast.
Yeah, I'd agree. Our experience is very similar. It's all about kind of establishing credentials early on. You know, I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, about the ability to deliver is very important. And then, you know, the expertise obviously comes into play as well. I think an important point of it is you know, where the research institute has a broad engagement in the industry already, that becomes very important as well in trying to, you know, be able to establish their credentials when you're looking for support for those initiatives internally within a big organization.
Brilliant. And another topic that's coming in quite a lot is around the ownership of intellectual property. So there is a question about, as a company, are you happy to receive an exclusive license, or do you always request assignment of IP?
Yes, so that can be a difficult one, and I suppose it depends on how important the IP is. But to answer the question, we have got both.
Yeah, this is the same here. It really depends from project to project. Sometimes it's not as important, and other times it's exceptionally important. And you know, being able to retain the rights is very important for us.
And of course, you know, when you get an assignment of IP, you can give a license back outside your field of use as well.
Brilliant. And we're getting questions as well about, have you noticed any differences in engagement models and business models between Ireland Inc.'s approach versus the US and potentially the EU approaches? So have you had any differences that you've noticed in engaging with those other research organizations?
Yeah, so we would have most of our exposure here in Ireland, some exposure in the US. Quite similar, I think, by and large. There would be some variations, but there again, we wouldn't have a huge amount of international experience. So maybe Danica, and you may have more.
Yeah, I think there's within Europe it's quite common. We haven't had too many differences. In the US, it can be a slightly different model depending on the research institute you're engaging with. You know, some of the larger ones will be kind of more kind of black and white in terms of their engagement approach, whereas the smaller ones much more flexible in terms of how they operate. So, but I would say overall, once you're kind of familiar with one environment, the other environments are quite easy to adapt to afterwards.
Brilliant. And another topic somewhat related to that is around state aid. So is state aid rules, is that something that you are concerned about or aware about when you're negotiating contracts for collaborative research?
Yeah, so we are quite aware of those. And obviously, there's clear rules in place. And, you know, the taxpayer does fund a lot of this. And it's important that we do adhere to those, and we do it all times.
Yeah, it's very much the same for us. You know, we were always very aware of what the obligations are, and you know, you keep that in mind as you're going through the engagement process, and you structure your engagement or your agreements around that. You know.
So we have more questions coming in about the internal structures within your companies. So would both your companies have specific resources allocated to collaboration? For example, a member of staff from each department, or and would that change depending on which research project it is?
Yeah, so when we started off, you know, many years ago, we were quite light in terms of having our own staff engaged, which we learned, you know, was a big disadvantage. So I think, you know, having strong engagement internally and appropriately resourced is really important.
Yeah, for us again, it kind of comes down to the project. So we have some teams who are, you know, a big part of their roles is engaging with the wider research community, and then, you know, but we might have some projects where they might be, you know, closely aligned with some of our product offerings, and in which case then you would have various staff in there that would be doing some research, but they wouldn't have too much time available to them to engage very broadly across a wide industry area. So it's kind of we kind of use it as a filtering process. You know, our research teams, our dedicated research teams, spend a lot of time looking across many broad areas of interest to the company in many geographies, right? And then once they find different opportunities, that usually filters through to the more product aligned R&D teams, and they would probably just focus in a particular area then.
And on the internal decision-making process, we've got a question here asking if you'd like to comment on winning internal support for more disruptive technologies for forward-looking research collaborations as opposed to collaborations focused on solving current challenges. Is that something that you've had difficulty with, adopting disruptive technologies that address maybe lower end markets and margins? Is that something that you've had experience of?
Yeah, so we have collaborations in both, and so I suppose you can find it easier to get justification for a high level of investment on current stuff, and probably we see much more difficult to get it on futuristic stuff. But you know, I think the main thing is to get started with a low investment, and then, you know, build up the confidence as the work shows to be successful.
Yeah, for us it's quite similar. I mean, we would have teams that would kind of look at the longer horizons, you know, maybe 5 years plus. But you know, our level of investment there then is not as heavy as it would be in the near terms, right, in 2 to 5 years horizon. So, you know, it's very much, but what we do is, you know, we use that long range research focus to kind of dip in, understand the different activities, get to know the different teams in the different areas, and then as things start to emerge and, you know, maybe the technology or the opportunities start to solidify a bit, you get more follow-on investment then after that. So it, you know, investment is all about kind of risk, right, and your return on it. So if it's highly risky with a lot of uncertainty, you know, the approach is generally just to, you know, keep the level of investment kind of to a minimum until you understand it, and as things become more clear and the certainty kind of firms up a little bit, there tends to be follow-on research then. But a big part of, you know, who the researchers are, their ability to deliver, the type of ecosystem they operate in, and their modus operandi all play into that as well, and that helps minimize some of the uncertainty.
Okay, so we have a question in here about your experience of working with Irish RPOs. If there was one thing that would change your experience, one aspect that would improve your experience of working with Irish RPOs, very challenging question, but what would that be if there's one aspect that you could pinpoint?
Oh, a difficult question, really. I'm trying to see where do I start here. So look, I think the cultural fit is important, and I think it's important that the both teams can work together quite well. And we find that, you know, when the researchers at the research organization have some industrial background, it can be a distinct advantage. But I think it's really, the cultural fit is really important.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, particularly, you know, the focus on the delivery and understanding what the deliverables are for all organizations involved in engagement, and for everyone to kind of, you know, map to that and have the structures that they can actually fulfill all their agreements. You know, that's, for us, that's really important, because if we can't depend on, you know, if we invest in something and we can't depend on the outcomes happening at the end, then that creates a lot of concern.
We have some questions in as well around kind of TRL scales, and where on the TRL scale would university research add the most value to your business? Is that something that you would have a comment on?
For us, right, TRL scales, right. I'd say 7 to 8, probably in our case.
Yeah, for us it varies a lot more because we would look at broader horizons. So really it very much depends on the area and the particular initiatives that we're looking at a given time.
There is a question in as well around, do you think there's anything that RPOs could be doing to communicate their research areas to industry and make industry aware of their research strengths? Is there anything you think they could be doing to improve that communication?
Yeah, maybe having more exposure to industry through the various means and forums that would be out there. I know the IRDG group do on some occasions have people in from academia talking to industrialists about what's done and what can be done and what has been achieved.
Yeah, I would say agreeing. I would agree with that. Communicating through different forums. The other kind of thing that's worked for us as well is we would often have informal communications back and forth with some of the research organizations or even individual teams without any particular target project in sight or anything like that, and just keeping one another aware of our interests until eventually, some point in time in the future you might converge on a very good collaboration opportunity. And that's worked very effectively for us because through that process we're both sharing and learning from one another, getting to know each other, and so then when it actually comes to defining a project and undertaking something, everyone knows the other's point of view and their capabilities, and you can hit the ground running a lot faster.
Brilliant. And we are kind of coming up to the end of our time now, so I'm going to ask one final question to both our speakers. What would be your top tips for companies thinking of collaborating with the Irish research system?
I think for me, is to agree up front what is required, what needs to be achieved, and the ground rules around that. And I think that investment up front is really well worthwhile, because it just ensures that after that then the collaboration does flow quite well between both groups. So I think not to underestimate getting that upfront work completed. Some companies might want to start quite fast, get something moving here, and then the whole thing breaks down. So I think it's clear expectations up front and taking time and space out to accomplish that.
Yeah, I would say, there's many research institutes in Ireland. I would say take the time to understand what's available in each of them and how they can engage and what their modus operandi is, and see how it fits with your own culture, and then try and develop it from there. And then, as Brendan was saying, when you do start to undertake a project, make sure all expectations are clearly set and understand from the outset.
Brilliant. So that kind of draws to end our Q&A session. We have a lot more questions that we just didn't have time to get to. So what we will do is we'll post these to our speakers after the event, and we can circulate FAQ document to everyone following the webinar. So I'd like to thank our speakers for their contribution this morning, for giving up their time and sharing their expertise with everyone. This is obviously a topic that everyone is very interested in. So I would very much like to thank Brendan Hogan and Donna Buckley for your time this morning. We will be asking everyone for your feedback following this webinar. So your feedback is very important to us. And if you have any comments on future topics that you would like us to explore related to research collaboration or anything to do with knowledge transfer, we'd really appreciate hearing that. Also, that's your chance. If you think of any questions following this webinar that you would like us to explore, you can put that into your feedback form and we will get back to you on that. So I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning. We've got really great numbers, and we hope that you got some really valuable advice from this webinar. Our next webinar is going to be on the 6th of October, and it's going to be technology specific. We're going to be looking at the area of artificial intelligence and how that is adding value to traditional Irish industries. So we hope to see you again on the 6th of October, and thank you all for attending this morning.